All right. So there's been a lot of talk about burnout in the chat, and we've had a couple calls on it. I'm not necessarily going to talk about how to handle burnout. I want to offer a different perspective on it. So we're going to kind of talk about, no, we are going to talk about stress tonight, because stress gets a bad name, but we aren't who we are without stress. So I want to just kind of give us a different perspective on how we view stress, how we can leverage stress, and then how we can use it to help almost program. So it's talking about stress in life from a coach's point of view. So because burnout is just physical or mental collapse caused by stress. I think, Dave, I was talking to you about, I think it's a mismanagement of stress. It's when our bodies can no longer handle the stress that's being placed upon it. But everything about us was and is developed by stress, right? Everything in our body is well organized. It got that way because of prior experiences with stress, mentally and physically. But stress is subjective, right? It's based on your past experiences, your expectations, and your knowledge about your own skills and abilities, which is what I think 1612 does really well, is it helps us learn new skills and abilities, but also see that we had a lot of these skills and abilities within us this whole time. But sometimes things can just build up that we sometimes need a group to help tell us to step back and take a better look at things, right? So stress is when there's a perceived challenge, right? If you don't perceive a challenge, there's going to be no stress response in the body. If you do perceive a challenge, even if one doesn't exist, you're going to react, right? Good stress will always produce favorable adaptations, right? We talk about, I think Elliot mentioned, there's like the eustress and the de-stress, or the, I don't know, I call them good and bad, right? So good stress produces favorable adaptations. It's usually something challenging, short-lived. We control it, and sometimes it's fun, right? It's training, it's long hikes, it's doing things like breath work, journaling, like those are all different forms of stress, but they're short-lived, right? And over time, those repeated bouts of good stress are going to improve our overall health and wellness. Then bad stress, right? It's usually prolonged, it's unpleasant, it's excessive. It's usually largely beyond our control, right? Traffic jams, abusive relationships, car accidents, work, coworkers, they tend to overwhelm the system. And this constant barrage of bad stress will slowly deplete vital resources, right? It leaves us weaker, it makes it harder for us to adapt to our environments. But understand, stress is just your response to a challenge. Doesn't matter what it is, physically, mentally, emotionally. And a stressor is something that will knock you out of your desired state or balance. It's what screws with your homeostasis. So even lifting weights is a stressor. It knocks us out of our desired state. You can't, my buddy and I, we can't deadlift heavy every week because your body needs to recover. Chronic stress overloads the body, right? Good stress is fundamental to life and involves every system within the body, right? So our stress response is simply your body's attempt to restore us back to normal. It's to try and bring us back to balance or homeostasis, when things are nice and balanced, right? And our nervous system is what controls everything. So if we can understand how our physiology works, which is kind of what we try to do in these calls, then if you understand how your physiology works, we can leverage that to force adaptation. We're in a weird time as humans that we don't have any real threats, right? Like back, you think of evolution, there's lions and you're fighting for food and you're fighting for shelter. We really don't have that kind of stress. So we're in a position where we have to force stress upon ourselves to adapt, changing our environments and putting ourselves in positions so we can force adaptation to change. The key organ to our stress response is our brain and our nervous system, right? So we've talked about it before. Sympathetic is fight or flight. Parasympathetic is rest or digest. We really don't have much control over it, except for really our breathing. Our inhale will actually push fight or flight, and our exhale will push rest or digest. So if you remember in the breathing talks, inhaling, we can leverage our inhale to like hype up our nervous system. So if we're training or getting ready to train, we can do more inhale or short, quick inhales, and we will actually prime the nervous system for training. But then if you remember from the other part of that talk, if we do prolonged exhales, we can promote parasympathetic rest or digest. So example, right? You encounter a lion. The lion is the stressor. You experience stress, and then a stress response occurs. We enter into fight or flight. And when we have a stress response, it shifts all of our resources away from bodily functions that are not directly related to survival. Okay, so if it has nothing to do with survival, it's going to take all the resources away from that and focus on your survival. So things like digestion, things of physical growth, tissue repair, fighting infection, sexual reproduction. If you're stressed and your body perceives a threat, it's not going to focus on all those other things that we need, right? So think about it, it doesn't make sense to do minor house repairs in the middle of an earthquake. So if you're stressed out, the body's not going to do its repairs because we got an earthquake going on. We got to put our resources towards survival. But when the emergency is over, we go into rest and digest, and we get back to building projects within the body, right? At each moment in time, so right now, 6 of us in here, your body's adjusting between rest and digest and fight or flight. So it's optimally tuned for your environment and your circumstance, right? So inhale, every time you inhale, it triggers your sympathetic system. Every time you exhale, it triggers your parasympathetic system. But when that balance is disturbed, the body may become almost attracted to being more protective of us, right? It's going to be more fight or flight. And this is when it makes it harder for you to sleep and relax or even enjoy life, is because you are in a constant state of fight or flight, right? It's protecting you. It feels like there's threats coming from every angle. And if this persists for months or years, that's when we start to, they call them diseases of civilization: heart disease, diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, right? So if we think about blood pressure, your blood pressure elevating when a lion's coming after you is super important. Your blood pressure elevating because, you know, Elliot, your kids haven't cleaned their room for a month and your blood pressure elevates every time, that's not really conducive to adaptation, right? So the blood pressure is important, but it's how it's applied that's going to induce the adaptation that we seek. And we have to, so our stress response's original purpose was to deal with physical challenges, but humans have evolved into things that have emotions, and our systems weren't necessarily developed for emotional challenges, right? Because emotions do trigger our stress response the same way, even if it doesn't perceive an immediate physical threat. And it's almost like an evolutionary mismatch for our systems. We weren't designed to deal with emotions. We weren't designed to be social creatures, but we found out being social creatures actually helps us with our survival, right? So I think emotional stress is one of the biggest causes of us being stressed out or getting burned out. And I've talked about emotions before. I talked about it last week. No one ever taught us how to handle emotions, right? Especially as me as a guy, I can't speak for the other guys, but guys don't have emotions. You're soft if you have emotions. Bill Burr has a skit, you push that stuff down until you have a heart attack, right? And that's what we see. A lot of men die more from stress-related issues. And I don't have the studies, but I would be safe to say that emotions and mishandling of emotions plays a part in that. And that chronic emotional stress plays a role in those diseases of civilization, okay? Any questions, comments, or concerns? That's kind of what I got for right now. I'm going to talk about training a little bit, but burnout just to me is that it's a mismanaged of stress. We're stressed out. We have too much stress. But I had this conversation with my wife last night that stress is usually choice. We tend to choose our stressors, right? You choose the job that you have to drive to. You choose the job that you have to wake up for every day. You choose your social circle. You choose to lift or not lift. You choose how you respond to life. You choose when you have emotions, right? And I know it seems like cut or dry and it's easier said than done, but no one's prepared or equipped us like how our bodies should work. But it's normal, right? There's all these emotions. I don't know how to handle them. So then, for guys, it may come out in anger, or if for me, for ADHD, I might handle my emotions through, talked about it last week, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, man. Like that was how I handled my stress, but it in turn was just creating more stress because I was avoiding kind of life. So burnout is normal, but like I was talking with Dave, if we can just take a step back and like Sean, right? It's our environment. The environment's causing the stress. Like your body just wants to survive the environment in which you've created. And when that environment's, so when we start to feel stressed out or burned out, you try to think of it as your body's way of communicating to you that what you're doing is no longer conducive to our survival, right? So if you're constantly stressed out, we can't repair our muscles. We can't repair the stuff in our brain. We don't sleep well. We don't digest well because we're in fight or flight, not rest and digest. Well, if we're not digesting our food, our body's not getting the macros and micros that it needs to repair itself, right? So when we look at, so like our current level of fitness, so fitness is just like your ability to adapt and survive. Your current level is what your body thinks is the optimal solution to your life's challenges. So I'll say it again, your current level of fitness is a reflection of what your body thinks is the optimal solution to your life's challenges. It's hard to make gains in the gym because the body doesn't want to pay the cost to repair that, right? That's why getting strong is hard. It's why losing weight is hard. It's why gaining weight is hard, is because there's a cost associated with it. So if you stop strength training, your body's going to take all that energy and all the resources away from that, because it's very energy heavy to maintain that, right? So if you want to change, you have to convince your body, or we have to encourage change. We have to convince our body that we're serious about change. That's why you can't lose weight in a week. That's why you don't squat 600 pounds in a week. You have to play the long game. You have to commit to that long game, right? We have to send a strong message that the current state of our body is not getting the job done. And sometimes that's taking a step back. That's not training as much. That's focusing. We talked about the 4 buckets, right? It's focusing on recovery and relationships and backing off of physical training, right? So if you think of our bodies as a bucket and stress is the water, everybody says, oh, you just got to reduce your stress. You got to get rid of stress. We can't get rid of stress. It's everywhere. But we have to increase our resilience to stress, or your capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, right? Because stress doesn't necessarily cause adaptation until the stress is over. The stress needs to stop so recovery can begin. That's where the adaptation happens. So if you have this same stress constantly and your body never has a chance to recover, that's when you start to get burned out. That's when we start to see overtraining, right? Our body is optimized to just deal with emergencies and not start building new projects. But when we get into recovery, that's when we start building our new projects, right? So that's where we have to build these tools: breath work, journaling, reading, talking with other people, learning how to manage our stress and train for our stress. So, I always like to look at the mind, train the mind the same way you do your body. Sam, was it you asking about your shoulder? Yeah. Okay. So I mentioned, I responded to that today. It's gradual load. It's gradual progression of stress, while making sure the stress is varied. So we have to continuously add stress, right? So Sean will tell you, right? We have to get stronger in the squat. We got to continuously add load. We have to continuously increase intensity, and then we got to back off a little bit. So it's the same with an injury. It's the same with our emotional states. We have to apply stress. We have to do hard things, and we got to back off a little bit. And sometimes the hardest thing is the easiest thing, the recovery, right? Sleep, eating, doing all the little things that we're supposed to do. understand that we're complex adaptive systems, and we benefit from exposure to variable stressors, which gives us a more comprehensive set of adaptations, right? So that's why if you think elite level power lifters, it's very hard to keep getting stronger because the stresses aren't variable. It's the same stressors all the time. So once you get to like an intermediate higher level, your PRs are going to be 5-10 pounds a year. That's why I think Conjugate's the best training system, but we won't get into that. It's the variation of stressors that we need. We need to mix things up. We need to mix things up. We have plans are useful, but they have to be flexible. And we want to start looking at our mind the same way we do our body, come up with training plans, right? So today I'm going to do something a little challenging outside my comfort zone. And that could be literally anything. That could be starting a new hobby, guitar playing, jujitsu. For me, it's running, which is not new. But doing new things is going to cause new experience and force new adaptations. And it gives you a new set of tools in which to work with in life, right? We don't want to reduce stress. We have to increase our resilience to it. But we also need to listen to our bodies. So when we're starting to feeling burned out or our bodies hurt in various areas, think of it as like your body's way of communicating with you, like, hey, like this isn't working anymore. We got to back off. And I think Dave talked about it last week with his training. Like he avoided everything else and just put everything into training, but then he started overtraining because the stressors were just mismanaged. Sam.
Yeah. So I'm curious, how would you say you identify kind of the line between like when you need to take a step back and focus on recovery and when that's more of, hey, this is just part of the process. You need to push to get through it. Like this is a hard process, whether it's training or something else. You like this section is just you pushing harder versus, okay, this is too much. Take a step back. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think everybody should answer this. For me, it's trial and error. Like you have to push to the brink of failure in the gym. You have to push. Sometimes injury is part of it. Like for powerlifting, injury was just part of the game. Like it happens. It helps me know what's weak. But I think getting close to burnout is part of that. I think learning where that edge is, but pushing that edge a little bit. And that just comes, I think you have to live life to do that. You have to push your limits. You have to push your edges. You have to do hard things to know where that's at. And I've done it several times. I'm sure I think Matt's talked about it. We've all probably been there, but that's you pushing your limits to know, if your sleep's garbage, you're eating like shit, you're not taking care of yourself. I always like to tell people to like take note of what's working when you're feeling good, because when things feel like shit, look back at what was working when things felt good. For me, it's when I'm not training or I'm not eating right, or I can tell that my mind isn't there. So I think it's trial and error. Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, 100% trial and error. Like at this point, I know for myself, I can push for about 5 weeks, and then I need to do a deload. Like if I don't, then it's, oh hey, my entire body's pissed off. Versus some of my athletes, I know that 4 weeks. 4 weeks is the most that I can get them to push before they need to back off. So a lot of trial and error, like you said, a lot of just doing harder things, getting to that mind. And you know what? Sometimes you got to cross the line.
Yeah, you have to. And having a plan. So I take the training approach to anything. So I talked about a couple of weeks ago with the 4 buckets. Like we come up with goals for recovery, relationships, physical, and then you make a plan for 12 weeks. So like I'm getting ready for a 10K. So it's just gradual exposure to continue. And I got to push. Last week I pushed a little too hard. So my body's like, yo, ankle, my knee were like, yo, we're not ready for that distance. We're not ready for that time. We got to back up a little bit. Or when I was like training heavy, my back would start to talk like, hey, this hurts. Like, I think your shoulder, you said, was starting to feel tight or flare up a little bit. Like, that's your body saying, hey, back up a little bit. We've been here before. If you decide to do something, we're going to think of like the pain or the injury as like, hey, we told you, we tried to tell you, but you didn't listen. And that's that line, especially in powerlifting, like, we have aches and pains. We always say it in football, like when I was coaching football, are you hurt or are you injured? Like, sometimes like aches and pains are normal, but if you've been there before, that's when your body's like, yo, this shit, we need to back off. Elliot, my man.
Yo, hey, all I was gonna say is that, you know, a new thing for me, and Sam, I think you're an athlete and you do athletic much longer than I have. It's fun because that process fluctuates and changes as it's gone along in terms of like where the line is, I guess, for things. And as it's progressed, there's been circumstances where I've been in a situation where I felt, which I think this is kind of what you're referring to, I guess, in that part where I'm like, oh, okay, I'm about to feel like this is a bridge too far, and then I'll work through it, not in a stupid or irresponsible way, but then it's kind of, I don't know. I think what I'm trying to formulate is that it's kind of a positive version of moving the goalpost for me, meaning that it's an ever evolving thing of feeling like, oh, and that's kind of the fun thing is this used to be something where I would be like, oh man, I'm feeling gas after that. And then not being afraid to, if you're following a training program or whatever, cut shit short and cut it shorter if you're feeling like it is getting to a point. So look, if there's a day where I'm squatting or whatever, today's a perfect fucking example. I fully planned on squatting and then I started warming up and I was just like, you know what? That doesn't feel like it's going to go well for no reason. I'm not injured or I'm not anything like that. And I was just like, you know what? Then never mind. I'm not going to do this right now. And instead I just was like fucking around with the heavy bag, like in my garage for like a half hour just to move still and do something. So I don't think that's really an answer to the question other than to say not having a hesitation to back off it and just do something different, which I think is what you were alluding to before, Nick, which is, and that's why my personal thing has been trying to grow that kind of shit that I find physically fulfilling. So that way I'm not dependent just on heavy lifting to scratch that itch, which is kind of where I was getting to a certain point. 2 years into a new hobby, still enjoy it, still love it, but it was kind of feeling like, I think I'm getting a little too dependent on this being a thing that's filling a cup for me. So I need to kind of add in a couple more options for on those days where if I don't feel like squatting or whatever, or if I feel like it's not going to go great, I'm not just like, well, what do I do now? Like, it's like, okay, well, go ride a bike, go do something, go do whatever. So yeah, that's the end of my rant.
Yeah, and it's going back to like having variations in your stressors. Like that's why I'm such a big proponent of just find what moves you and move towards it. And then if you get towards it and it doesn't move you anymore, move towards something else, right? Like, we're humans, we're meant to move, right? So like that's Ellie's talking. He's boxing, he's riding bikes, he's doing sprints, he's throwing shit, he's dragging sleds. It's that constant variation and just finding new ways to challenge yourself. You know, the gym isn't the only way to challenge yourself. I think it's a great way to mold ourselves and build character. But, you know, what are you capable of doing outside of the gym? You know, like the thing for life. So powerlifting, if you're not competing in powerlifting, I don't think you need to train like a powerlifter. You know, and that's it's the same thing with our minds, right? We got to do mentally hard things. And that's where you start to learn about yourself. You learn about your capabilities. You learn what you can and can't handle. But, you know, if you're starting to burn out or feeling burned out or showing signs of burnout, you need to take a step back and look at your environment, right? How's your movement? How's your relationship with yourself and your people? Are you getting enough sleep? You know, are you meditating? Are you eating right? You know, those simple things that we kind of talk about in here, like those little things. Are you reading? Are you journaling? Are you doing hobbies? I'm a big proponent of hobbies. I'm a collector of hobbies. You know, photography, music, drawing, writing, lettering, you know, just being a beginner again, it just helps push this and stress your brain a little bit. You know, I think we get kind of caught up working 40, 50-hour weeks. And then by the time we get home, we're kind of drained. We don't want to do anything else. Right.
Hey, Nick, can I throw something else in there?
Yeah.
The reason I asked that is because, so like, I find that to be a thing, right? Because all this shit for me, any of this movement stuff, it's this continued thing of like, it's just fun doing new shit, right? It's fulfilling. I don't know, not conquer. I don't know, because it's like this. I have no interest in being a competitor in any of these things, but it's fun to just develop this tool belt. I was joking with Charlie about it. Like our goal, just to get mildly decent at a lot of shit. That's like just or like enough to just enjoy that. And so, anyways, I view even like the cold plunge and the ice bath stuff as being the thing. Like that makes me feel like not only does it physically make me feel refreshed, but it makes me feel like I don't say beat something, but it's another tool of a thing to be like, there's a success. Like it's a training thing. It's 3 minutes long, but it feels, it scratches that same urge of like, I'm progressing in my adaptability to a thing that's hard, if that makes any sense. So not only is it physiologically refreshing for me, but it's another piece, and it's an easy one to feel like, there's a thing that sucks that I did today. But if that is a 2 minute adventure, I don't know if that makes sense.
Sam, does that answer your question, man?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you were just saying kind of resonates just with the fact that right now, I mean, I look at all my hobbies, everything I'm just doing day to day. And I think the gym or working out is probably at the top in terms of what I pour the most into, most of my energy and most of my thought process, most of my everything. And I think it probably stems from just having physical goals really early on in my life, and having very big, like insecurities and stuff. And so this is something I've always kind of worked toward, but I don't have a ton of other things that I have that same type of passion around. So when I do get injured, like recently with my shoulder, it seems like the whole world is crashing down, because like the one thing that I put under like the purpose label in my life is now has to take a pause or kind of adjust a little bit at the very least to accommodate, that injury or something else. And I don't have, other things just, from a time perspective. I have a kid, my wife and I have opposite schedules. So it's a lot of me doing other things that are more or less necessities and not necessarily habits or fulfillment. But so that's what when I do get injured, it feels like the stress builds up there, because then it's like I can't do this one thing that I really fucking want to do, that I feel like I've been trying to do my whole life, and now I can't do it, if that makes sense.
So let's look at our injury as differently. It doesn't mean you can't train. It's giving you the opportunity to find a different way to train, to find a new way to train, because the way you've been training continues to put you in this position. Like this, so think of it as this is your body trying to help you out and like tell you like, yo, this isn't working anymore. You can either listen, or we're going to continue to get hurt more frequently, and then it's going to become a bigger disaster. So yeah, I've had that feeling too when I competed and I tore my adductor and like lost feeling in my leg. Like, I was a miserable fuck for like 2 weeks. I had to like take 2 weeks off of the gym because I couldn't be around anybody. Like I was getting ready for Worlds, and like it sucked, but it's a learning opportunity, right? We can, again, is it happening to you or is it happening for you? So now you can start to experiment with new ways of training and different perspectives, maybe new tools, kettlebells, maces, rock climbing, just exposing your body to different types of stressors instead of the same ones that you've continued to do. Because that's it. Because all injury is your body wasn't strong enough to handle the forces you were asking it to do. So now we got to get it strong. We can't go back to what we were doing. Like most people, like they'll take a couple of weeks off, I was feeling better, and then they go right back to what they were doing, and then they go, oh, I don't know how I got hurt again. I took time off. we got to strengthen everything, right? So maybe it's just time to look at training a little differently. And that's, I don't know if you have a coach, or you can go back to some of my old videos and consume all that stuff. But that's kind of, I do this for a living. Sean does it for a living. I'm opening a musculoskeletal clinic here in 2 months. So, and I have this conversation every day with people with injury. It's just an opportunity to do something new, to find out more about yourself and learn about yourself.
For sure. I think ultimately, I mean, the first step for me is just changing my mindset and how I look at injury. Because what you said is exactly true. I've hurt my shoulder a number of times now, and each time it's, with some exceptions, it's taking time off, letting it feel better, and then going right back to what I do, maybe trying to adjust something relatively small, but obviously not big enough to actually make a difference. So I'm going right back to doing what I'm doing just because that's what I want to do, or that's what I've told myself I want to do, and I've told myself I need to do, so I do it. So I just need to kind of shift how I look at that and see it more as an opportunity, and then make those changes.
Yeah. And like I posted in that today, like your joints have ranges of motion. So move your joints, and if they feel sticky or sore, that's your body like, hey, we're not cool there. Well, that means you probably need to strengthen it. But what most people do when they get injured is they tend to avoid moving the body in the manner in which it would hurt. So then your brain starts to think, yo, that position hurts. We're going to not do that. Well, then when you go back to doing what you want to do and you haven't done anything, that's when the injury will start to creep in. So it goes back to, we have to force adaptation. We have to convince the body and the mind, like, yo, I want to be able to have full access to my shoulder. So you have to train that. Train your, like, not even like the band, like example, like the banded external, internal rotations for like shoulder prehab work. Like grab a heavy fucking dumbbell and train heavy internal and external rotation. You know what I mean? Like train your joints to be strong as shit. Not, most people just train like their shoulders or their hips. Train all your joints that way. And then you'll start to feel a little bit better and healthier, I think. But like Sean said, without seeing you move, it's hard to kind of, so that's why I say just move your joints. And if something feels shitty, like lean into that shittiness. Injury is a gift. It's an opportunity for you to explore things and do new things. So like you want to talk about like changing things up, now's your time. Look into ISOs, like ISOs, can you hang for 3 minutes? Can you hold a push-up position plank for 3 minutes? Can you hold a deep push-up for 3 minutes? Can you hang from one hand for, 1 to 3 minutes? So there's just new challenges. Because if we evolved from like monkeys, right? From climbing tree to tree, our shoulders are meant to do that, but nobody usually trains that portion of their shoulder, elbow, and wrist. So getting like rock climbing could be beneficial.
One of my favorite things I got when going through that was and obviously you can probably make it yourself or do whatever, but I got one of the hydro bags from Onnit. And I'm sure there's lots of variations of those. Like hands down, dude, that's one of my favorite $100 I've ever spent on any toys since I started messing around with this stuff. Just because it's that same thing that and I used it a shit ton when I was like rehabbing for my shoulder and stuff. Like you can just do so much fun things with that. And again, Nick or Sean probably have other recommendations on other things that might be more versatile, but just as like someone who had no sense of anything when coming into this, it was such like, it literally felt like a kid with a toy that you're just like, there's pretty much no way to do this wrong. So I can just swing this around and I can do shit with it. And it just, when I wasn't able to train like the way I had become adapted to training, that was a implement or a toy that I found very satisfying to make me feel like, shit, I was able to do some good stuff today. But again, I'm sure there's lots of stuff like that.
No, he's right. Like that's why, like if you've always trained with a barbell, like mix it up. Learn, like think of like the implements as tools to force adaptation. So if you get strong in the positions you train. So if you always train straight bar bench press, your body's going to find the easiest way to accomplish that task. It might not necessarily be the best long term. That's where you start to see overuse injuries. So like your technique might be on point, but that can cause muscles to be short on one side, long on the other. So doing things like water bags, sandbags, maces, Indian clubs, kettlebells, and learning those tools and how they can fit into your training, that's going to be extremely versatile to have them in your toolbox. Like, again, if the barbell is the only thing you have, I would suggest buying a kettlebell, 35 and a 50-pound kettlebell, and training outside for a while and learning to master the clean, the snatch, the swing, goblet squat, and just have fun with that for a while. And then go back to what you're doing and see how your shoulder feels. Body weight, push-ups, pull-ups, with that variation, we go back again, the stress, the variation, the planning. We need variation in stressors. If it's always the same stress, we start to get overloaded. And that's your shoulders kind of telling you, like, this isn't working no more. It's the same if we're feeling sad all the time or depressed or anxious. Like, there's something, our body's just trying to tell us, like, yo, something's off. Like, the environment or the stress you're encountering, this isn't conducive for what we're trying to do. And then it overloads but you gotta, I think you have to live life. That's it, is like my like, do new things, do things that interest you. I don't know, I feel everybody has things they've always wanted to try that they never did. And they just put it off, or they say, I'm too old to have hobbies, or, I have kids, I don't have time. Yeah, movement's my prescription for everything. Find what moves you and move, man. If jujitsu interests you, go do it. You don't have to do weight training. Go, roll a couple times a week. Firearms, I don't know, whatever. But yeah. Anything else, anybody?
I'm gonna go empty out the lawnmower clip bag. Good to see you, boys.
Good to see you too. Thanks for stopping in.
Yeah, fellas. Later.
Yeah, so we'll close out. Like, the stress is a good thing. We need stress. We need it to adapt. So again, we have to look at, what do we want? What are we trying to build? What do we want? Why do we want it? And who do we need to become in order to achieve it? Again, the injury is an opportunity for you to do new things, to explore different things. Like, you could take time off and do some reading, some writing, some more self-discovery type stuff. Learn a new skill, and I think you'll feel tons better mentally. It's just taking that step back and reevaluating. Rest is important, but depends on you have to think of, how do we apply it? Was there a diagnosis with your shoulder? I'm going to stop recording since people don't have to watch.